We're live.
All right, welcome back, everybody, to House Energy and Digital Infrastructure. We are continuing our conversation of H740 with Jared Duvall, a climate counselor, and we'll just introduce ourselves. My name's Kathleen James, and I am from the Bennington 4 District.
Scott Campbell from St. John. Richard Bailey, Lemoore 2. Chris Morrow, Wyndham, Windsor, Bennington. Michael Southworth, Caledonia.
Christopher Howland, Rutland 4.
Tara Torrey, Washington 2.
Graham Flutler, Chittenden 13, Burlington. Laura Sabelli, Minton.
In the room, Jane.
Jane Lazarchuk, Climate Action Office, Agency of Natural Resources.
Allison Vespezi from Atmospheric Clean Environment.
All right, for the record, Jared, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chair James and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Jared Duvall. I'm joining you today as a member of the Vermont Climate Council, and I want to be clear that my testimony is solely in my capacity as an appointed member of the Climate Council and does not represent a position of the organization I work for. As I've mentioned to this committee previously, EAN does not take positions on bills before the legislature. So in my council capacity, I've served on the Climate Council since October of 2020. When I was first appointed by the Senate Committee on Committees to serve as the member of the Climate Council from, and I quote, a Vermont-based organization with expertise in energy and data analysis. I was reappointed to this by the Senate Committee on Committees in 2023, and I'm currently serving with my second term on the council. On the council, I chair the Science and Data Subcommittee and also serve on the Cross-Sector Mitigation Subcommittee, AKA Pollution Reduction Recommendations, and also serve on the Council Steering Committee. In these capacities, I was a co-author of both the initial Vermont Climate Action Plan in 2021 and the updated Climate Action Plan adopted by the Council as of July 1st of last year, 2025. And I want to share that as councilors, we are required by the Global Warming Solutions Act, Act 153 of 2020, to make recommendations to the legislature, specifically Section 4 of 10 VSA Chapter 24, subsection 591D, outlines the things that the council shall recommend to the legislature, including related to statutory recommendations. So from my perspective as a counselor and as chair of the Science and Data Subcommittee, I want to share with you that I believe H740 is the single most important bill before the committee this session in terms of helping to meet Vermont's commitments to reduce climate pollution and to do so in ways that lower overall costs. Not because this bill will reduce pollution or costs on its own, but because tracking key data and information is a necessary precursor to more meaningful and effective pollution and energy cost reduction efforts in Vermont. Quite simply, if we can't do this most basic and simple of steps, we're not going to be able to reduce pollution and costs in the ways that have proven to be most effective in other states. The reporting requirement envisioned in this bill is a top priority recommendation of the Climate Council, one of the top 10. And specifically, the first emissions reduction recommendation made by the Council in the 2025 Climate Action Plan is to, quote, develop a framework for the reporting of GHG emissions data from fuel suppliers and other significant emitters of climate pollution. Right now, Vermont has very good estimates of the aggregate amount of statewide climate pollution emitted in Vermont by virtue of the Vermont greenhouse gas inventory produced by the Agency of Natural Resources. What we do not currently know is which fossil fuel companies are responsible for what share of those emissions, i.e., how many gallons of fossil fuels are imported into and sold within Vermont by whom. This lack of information limits the state's ability to have those corporations be held responsible for helping to reduce pollution over time. As the saying goes, if you don't measure it, you can't improve it. Overall, there are 5 key reasons that as a member of the council and chair of the Science and Data Subcommittee that I support H740. First, basic data collection and reporting as proposed with the Greenhouse Gas Reporting Registry is a necessary precursor for any meaningful and effective pollution reduction policy effort. This has been true for the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or RGGI, in New England states, including Vermont, and northeastern states, I should say. It's been true of clean fuel standards in Washington, Oregon, and California. It's been true of cap and invest programs in Washington, Oregon, and California. And New York is also now advancing a GHG reporting requirement as the first step in its proposed multi-sector cap and invest program. And I believe, heard today from Jane and Secretary Moore, that Massachusetts is advancing a reporting requirement on its heating fuel sector. Second, as a participant in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, Vermont is already among the states that require reporting of emissions, specifically from any fossil fuel fired power plant above 25 megawatts. So there's a precedent for requiring this type of reporting. Right now, we're just limiting who does the reporting. And I would say to our least emitting, least costly sector, not our most polluting, most costly sector. So beyond the utility sector, and in contrast, Vermont does not currently require supplier level reporting of emissions from what are by far the largest sources of climate pollution in Vermont. The combined hundreds of millions of gallons of gasoline, diesel, fuel oil, propane, and other fossil fuels imported into Vermont by fossil fuel corporations for use in the transportation and thermal sectors. Specifically, the transportation and thermal sectors combine for approximately 72% of Vermont's climate pollution as of the latest inventory, far surpassing our electricity sector at only 3%. Another reason that I support this as a member of the council and chair of the Science and Data Subcommittee is that as the federal government becomes a less reliable source of energy and emissions data collection and reporting, we're already seeing this with EIA and EPA, a state level reporting requirement ensures that Vermont can track and understand key data that is necessary to inform efforts to protect the health and environment of Vermont and Vermonters. I also want to share that for purposes of efficiency, clarity, and effectiveness, I agree with ANR's recommendation, which is reflected in H740, for a standalone reporting rule rather than an attempt at data harmonization, whereby various pieces of data would aim to be stitched together from across separate agencies of state government. While the tax department already collects some data from fuel suppliers, such data are not sufficient to calculate emissions because emissions calculations require data not just about gallons sold, but also about fuel type and content, as the Secretary and Jane spoke to earlier.
All right, say that again. The data that tax gets isn't sufficient
because they're reporting gallons sold of, say, fuel oil, propane, but we don't necessarily know the bio content of those fuels. That's not tracked by tax, but it's like the emissions that come from different fuels are different depending on the bio content. And so that would be important information to track for a greenhouse gas reporting requirement that is currently not collected by tax. Is that sufficient? Chair James, did that?
you say it one more time. So they're reporting gallons sold,
Yes.
but they're not reporting.
On gallons of biofuels, and when either on their own or when blended with fossil fuels, they will have a different emissions calculation depending on the bio content as opposed to the fossil content.
So that would mean taking a plant-based oil and mixing it with a traditional beef butter oil. So that's the type of biofuel that's coming from other sources, plant sources.
Yes.
Let me react. Biofuel is plant sourced oil.
Plant or biological based. I mean, there's many different
Animal
types of
fat,
bio.
okay.
Yeah,
All right.
exactly.
Okay, any bio meaning something that was living above
That's
the
right.
grass.
Yes.
It was living recently.
Yeah. So, examples of biofuels include biodiesel, which can be made from different It can be made from recycled restaurant oil. It can
Right,
be made
right.
from different agricultural waste. It can be, there, as you said, there's also animal fats that can be involved. So there's a whole bunch of different types of biofuels, and they all have different emissions associated with their combustion. And so it's important, if ANR is seeking to understand the emission of the fuels sold, that there's not sufficient data in what is collected by the tax department already to be able to fully calculate that as accurately as we'd like. Set aside the logistical considerations of the challenges of sharing the information, which was already spoken to.
And just to make the difference explicit, if you have a mixture of 80% diesel, 20% bio, so you've got 100 gallons, that's 80 gallons diesel, 20 gallons bio. That's going to have a different emissions profile than 100 gallons of diesel. Got it. Thank you.
And then there's also ethanol and gasoline, which is another, that was a vital factor.
Yeah.
How do you calculate the use of ethanol? Is it, do you include the diesel involved in running the tractors that seed it and harvest it and all that, Right. So it gets complicated.
And then the last thing that I wanted to share with the committee is that in climate council meetings, there was the lone vote against recommending a reporting requirement came from the counselor appointed to represent the fossil fuel industry, who argued that fossil fuel suppliers do not have the time or expertise to calculate emissions. My understanding is that this argument at best reflects a misunderstanding. A reporting requirement would not require the corporations that import fossil fuels into Vermont to calculate emissions. Rather, as proposed in H740 and as done in other states, fossil fuel suppliers will merely have to report data that they already have, specifically, quote, the types and volumes of fuel sold, and then the calculation of the emissions associated with the combustion of those fuels can and would be completed by ANR, not the fossil fuel corporations themselves. So these are, after reviewing H740, after reviewing the climate action plan recommendations, these are the reasons that I support this bill as a foundational necessary piece for any meaningful efforts to reduce pollution and costs going forward.
Comments or questions for, yeah.
So I'm looking at the greenhouse gas emission chart here. So with your new plan, what's going to be changing in this reporting structure that isn't already here?
Mm-hmm. With relation to the greenhouse gas inventory?
For what you are proposing us to do with the 800,000 with the new tracking system and everything, is this report going to look different?
Sorry, I just want to make sure I'm clear on what report you're referring to. Is this the climate action plan? Is it the greenhouse gas inventory?
This is the greenhouse gas inventory.
Okay.
That, I believe
So-
this is the ANR's chart.
Yeah.
I believe.
Last
So-
was 2025, July 2025.
So as chair of the Science and Data Subcommittee, I certainly review the greenhouse gas inventory and forecast. I do not, I'm not involved in producing it, so I would defer to Jane and ANR about the change that they envision making about the inventory. But my understanding is that on the one hand, this would help improve some of the data and accuracy in the inventory, specifically with regard to how biofuels are included and measured or not. Separately, I see this as being necessary not just about the inventory. I think that this bill and the data collection that it envisions would improve the quality of the inventory. But I think it is more about, if we want to help reduce pollution and costs in Vermont, we need to know the sources of that pollution and cost, not just, right now we have this aggregate knowledge of, here are the hundreds of thousands of gallons, here's the number of gallons of gasoline sold, but we don't know who's bringing that in. And if you all envision any type of policy framework in the future that would have the sources, the importers of that fuel responsible for helping to Vermont to reduce pollution and costs over time, then we need to know who's importing that and how much of the statewide pollution that is created, those individual entities are responsible for. Right now, we don't have that information.
Do you have an opinion on whether, as we were discussing earlier, single facilities above a certain emissions level should or should not be included?
I don't have a firm final opinion on that. I am curious to see the research that A&R is doing on that. I do think that there is a benefit to some level of consistency between states in terms of the levels that they set for that reporting. And I'm interested to know that New York, for instance, sets their level at 10,000 tons. There are different state contexts, but I think gathering the information that A&R is gathering on what do different states require for reporting of different facilities at different thresholds is a necessary precursor to forming an informed opinion on that. So I would wait and reserve judgment, but I think I'm glad that we're looking into it, but I think there's more information to gather before that should be finalized.
Presumably the states we care about are New York, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, most other New England states secondarily.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, certainly the consistency for the companies that would have to report, they're going to be very familiar with. There are fuel companies operating in the Northeast that are not operating in other parts of the country that have these requirements and vice versa.
More questions for Councillor Duval?
So, as you know, I really see this work around emissions tracking is deeply connected to the energy transition and the economic condition.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if you have an answer for this, and I don't have an answer for this. This is not a trick question. I'm really trying to think about this feels like a very important data source to kind of track that transition. It always has to me. But I'm trying to think about other data points that might help us additionally track that transition so that we are aware of people falling behind.
Yeah.
Which is
No,
happens in unregulated sectors that are consolidating.
No, thank you for that question. I mean, I'll take my Climate Council hat off for a second and put my Energy Action Network hat on. The question you're raising is, it's okay, is exactly the primary question that we've been focused on with our recent research and reporting. As I shared, the special all-day session was in October. Primarily around energy costs and energy affordability. So yes, important to know energy use, important to know emissions. That's primarily what this is about. But also the amounts of those fuels that we're talking about lead to different costs for different people over different periods of time. And so, personally, I am very interested in knowing, how much are the energy status quo in Vermont costs Vermonters at the household level, at the business level, and over time, and how can we bring those costs down? And how much does the energy status quo cost Vermont as a state as a whole, both directly in terms of how much we spend? The latest year of data, over $2 billion spent on fossil fuels, but also the indirect costs of that fossil fuel dependence. It's not just that those fuels have tended to be expensive and price volatile, leading to very little kind of stability for the planning of household or business budgets. It's also that it's 100% imported fuel, which means that most of the cost that we pay for it is bound up in the commodity cost of importing that fuel from some far-flung place, which drains money out of the state. So our estimates are that roughly 75% of every dollar that we spend on fossil fuel leaves the Vermont economy versus other fuel sources, other strategies that are recommended in the climate action plan, like weatherization. Most of the cost of weatherization is local contractor labor, as opposed to wood heat, where most of the wood that is used for heating in Vermont comes from the state, often legally required in terms of not transporting cordwood beyond certain distances or across state lines. And of course, the same is also true with electricity. A far higher share of our electricity dollars staying and recirculating in state, because most of the costs on our electricity bill go to things like line maintenance and tree trimming and customer service operations and either local or regional power purchases that keep our dollars much more local than as a part of a global fossil fuel market. So I know that this bill doesn't directly address that, but I want to share with you and the committee that there are, there's additional data that EAN is collecting and reporting on as with regard to energy costs and energy affordability that I think is also an important part of this conversation. But then there's data that, simply is not shared or is not accessible and needs it needs regulation and statutory clarity to make sure that it's provided. Like, no nonprofit could report the data that you're seeking because it's not, or analyze it because it's not reported. It's a black box. And so, I think that there is an important element of transparency that goes into just basic data collection of the sort that this bill envisions. And I'm saying that as switching back to my
Council.
Which has, Rick Torrey?
As a town energy coordinator, I'm wondering, is this going to filter down to the town level, this kind of insight to help us with our local goals?
Potentially. I also see challenges there. And the reason I say that is because, if an importer of fossil fuels into Vermont is reporting the number of gallons that they sell, it's likely that they're going to be reporting the number of gallons that they sell from their place of business, and they won't necessarily know
Where?
the end point of use.
Okay.
It's especially complicated for transportation fuels because it's a mobile fuel source. But even with some heating fuel. So I do think that there's value in terms of having more granular and local data. But I think that this is primarily about knowing the amounts, the volumes, the content, the types of fuel sold at the supplier level, which likely is not going to track on to, this amount of fuel use or emissions by town.
So why would even by county be relevant in that case? Not really a geographical, sounds like. Because I would love to be able to connect it to energy burden,
Yes.
Change over time.
Yeah.
But it sounds like it's not, because it's the front end of the transaction. It's not.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I just have a question though, as we, in the future, if we were going to design a policy, wouldn't it be really helpful to see if there are counties of the state that are far more reliant on fossil fuels than others? It seems to me like it could be a really easy snapshot to show, where there are more or fewer.
Maybe that's a good question for Matt in terms of, I don't know what their sales territory is. Like, does it go outside of the county? I just have no insight into how transactions.
I think that data envisioned in the kind of by county part of this bill, it's potential that it gets to the very question that Rep. Sebelia has brought up multiple times, and I think is really important in terms of understanding the landscape of suppliers geographically across
As they
Vermont.
Contract.
Right, and where there may be gaps in energy supply and
I
availability.
see. Okay.
Which
Yeah,
it
that's-
feels to me more possible to do at a county level or a regional level than it would be at a town level.
Yes, well, so following up on that, it seems to me that it wouldn't be hard to collect data, based on the location of the supplier, but not necessarily, but to ask the supplier to then sort out where that fuels could be delivered. I'm talking about heating fuels now, because transportation fuels would be at their home, so they're more difficult, but maybe that, I'm thinking before I'm talking here, or talking before I'm thinking. I guess asking the fuel suppliers to include the town where that heating fuel is delivered to ANR, would be possible. And then ANR would be able to provide town level detail or county level detail. And that would be useful for understanding, as Reps has talked about, where there are potential gaps in availability for heating fuels. And as for transportation fuels, I guess you would know where the gas stations are, basically, right? Where they're being supplied from, at least. But I wanted to ask another question. And that was in your role as chair of science and data. Does that give you any thoughts or questions about hurdles for ANR to set up this data collection system? If you have any thoughts about that? Does it seem straightforward? Does it seem like it would be really complicated?
Yeah, I mean, when we were working on the climate action plan, part of that involved outreach to other states that have been active in these areas and have been leaders in reducing pollution and helping reduce energy costs as well. I know that, I spoke with the former program manager in Oregon of the Clean Fuels program there, and talked about how they set up this reporting requirement and then how they manage it going forward. The result of that conversation was similar to what Secretary Moore and Jane shared, which is that there's this initial upfront cost to develop the reporting platform, and then there's a smaller ongoing cost of a staff to collect and file the reports, much of which can be done electronically, but it does need quality control and kind of spot audits. And but they said that it's a very manageable task going forward. My recollection from Oregon was that they have basically one point person that the setup was a different process and a different staff requirement, but that they had one person that basically was responsible for collecting the data and ensuring, I believe they worked with contractors to do some of the kind of like spot checks in terms of to verify the accuracy and the quality of the reports coming from the fuel suppliers.
Well, do you have any sense then about ANR's request for two full-time positions to be able to manage this?
I would defer to them, knowing their own.
Yeah. Well, I guess you mentioned checking with other states like Oregon.
Yeah,
seems like it would be a much larger endeavor.
Although their reporting requirement is just on originally it was just on the transportation side. Now that they have a cap and invest program that's designed to reduce pollution and help folks lower costs, across different sectors, their reporting requirement is across all fuels. And so I don't know to what degree that the staffing of that has changed. This was a couple of years ago when we were asking them about the reporting for their clean fuels standard. So that may be different.
I wonder if it would make sense for us to ask that question of either of other states or of NCSL or somebody that would be able to give us a, because we don't, obviously, AR says this is what we need. We don't have any way of assessing that. And of course, the dollars is a big hurdle. Yeah, so especially in a year when resources are declining, not available. So I don't know, do you have any comment on that?
No, I mean, my understanding is that ANR has been speaking with other states and gathering information about what it takes to run their programs. And so my belief is that they have more up-to-date information on that than I do. I would just mention that as one example.
Yeah, okay. And then I have a specific question.
Yeah, no, I think
this has got to analyzing the indirect costs of reliance on fossil fuels. So the direct costs are obvious. It should cost a certain amount of money. And among the indirect costs are what is the cost to economic activity by all that money leaving Vermont's economy and going out of state.
Yeah.
Another indirect cost, and I wonder if this has been somebody that tried to assess this.
Yeah.
The cost of the volatility of fossil fuels and the uncertainty about what the price will be next year. And has anybody tried to come up with a way of putting a number on that?
It's an interesting question. Like an economic anxiety index.
Well, I mean, it's sort of a discount. It's sort of a discount, right? Which is a measure of the uncertainty of the future value of whatever it is you're trying to assess.
Yeah, I am not aware of that, but I think that the list of those costs beyond just the sticker or the bill price is long, and you know, we're in an environment right now where the Federal Environmental Protection Agency just said that they are no longer going to account for the cost to human health from air pollution.
Yeah.
That the value of human life, the health costs related to asthma and other respiratory diseases are going to be treated as zero. And so to me, that signals that Vermont, which is a major change in decades of EPA policy. To me, that underscores something that came up in my testimony earlier, which is I think it's advisable for Vermont to have a greater degree of control over the data that we collect and have because of how many data sources are being taken down or stopping being collected, either as a policy choice of the current administration or because of gaps in because of shutdowns. There were months of data that were not collected. So I think having more control and ability to kind of write our own future is a wise thing in these times, and that this bill helps do that with some very critical and important information.
Thanks.
Yeah, I actually just want to underscore that because we're having such a wide-ranging, conversation that we're talking a lot, quite rightly, about, what additional information we would be gathering by standing up our own reporting framework. But I was actually very happy to be reminded just now that we heard earlier testimony about the extent to which the current greenhouse gas inventory is reliant on federal data.
Yes.
And to assume that we're just going to continue to be able to get that data, that it's going to be reliable, that it's going to be timely, is, I think, maybe even more important. So,
I think a huge question mark at best.
yeah. Okay. All right. Jared, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate your time. Just before we go off live, I always like to look ahead at the agenda a little bit. So we're going to be back at 1 o'clock and we're going to take more testimony on 753 about disconnections and ratepayer protections. And we're going to pivot back to 740. And then the one thing I wanted to make sure folks see is that at 2:30, we're cramming a lot in, and I just want to make sure, Alex, that I've got it right. So we have the PUC coming in. I think we're going to have a quick conversation about their FY27 budget, just as part of our budget work. Chair McNamara has said there's, not much. Doesn't sound like there's going to be a whole lot to talk about. Then I believe we're going to also hear from Greg to get their feedback on H527. And I think, is Ellen coming to walk through an updated draft?
She wasn't feeling great. She didn't know if she was going to be around for that. She said she might be able to zoom in. I can check it with her though.
Okay, if you could just confirm to know whether we're expecting a walkthrough or of an updated draft, or whether we're just going to be hearing from the PUC.
Okay.
We have the.
Yeah,
We do.
we just
We do.
on the website, but I can also email it.
Yep. Great. It is here. Yep. So, Alex, can you send that around?
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much. All right. That's the plan. So thanks, everybody.